Good afternoon and welcome to the Society for Biomaterials webinar on making scientific presentations. Today we'll talk about giving lucid and impactful presentations in a number of different formats. Many of you might be preparing to deliver oral presentations at the World Biomaterials Congress, or defending your PhD thesis, or preparing investor pitches. Regardless of the kind of presentation, we hope to provide you with some ways to improve your presentation skills. Our speakers today will be Jason Guo, the SFB National Student Chapter President from Rice University, and Neil Thompson from Teach the Geek. Neil will be delivering the presentation, Jason will be pummeling him with questions, and I'll interject from time to time with questions from you all. To pose a question, please enter it in the chat or questions window, and I'll do my best to make sure all questions are addressed before we end the webinar. Jason Guo, SFB's National Student Chapter President, would you be kind enough to introduce Neil?
Sure thing. So thank you, Dan. As I myself am preparing to deliver an oral presentation in Glasgow for the Congress, this actually comes at a perfect time. So I'm very happy to participate and excited to hear from Neil, our speaker. So Neil Thompson is an entrepreneur, a children's book author, and a patent agent. For years, he worked as a product development engineer in the medical device industry, and he started the online platform Teach the Geek to help scientists and engineers with non-technical skills that often get overlooked and oftentimes we don't get training on in our very technical sort of oriented careers. And so his first target, of course, is public speaking. After one too many failed presentations in front of senior management, he knew he had to improve. And so the first offering of his platform, in which he shares the lessons that he learned to all of us, is Teach the Geek to Speak. And it's an online course to help with public speaking, and you can learn more about it on his website, teachthegeek.com. So with that said, Neil, we're excited to hear from you, and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason, for that introduction. Thank you, Dan, for the opportunity to speak to the Society for Biomaterials membership. As you all know by now, my name is Neil Thompson. I don't really know why I felt the need to say that again, as if you didn't hear it already, but I guess it's a force of habit. But as Jason said, I used to work in medical devices as an engineer, and public speaking definitely came up at some point, and I had to address it. And I eventually did, and that's what I'm basically going to be speaking to you all about, the importance of public speaking when you are a technical professional. And I'll definitely get into more of what Teach the Geek to Speak is as the presentation goes on. So a bit more about myself. As you all know, I worked in medical devices for a number of years, but it didn't always start off that way. When I graduated from graduate school, and I took a job as a research associate in the Boston area. I was working at this small startup company, and as a research associate, there was no public speaking involved, and I was not upset by that fact. I was very happy to work in the lab, doing lab work and writing protocols and reports, typical lab work. It wasn't until I left that job and I took a job out here in California. I did the research associate job for maybe a little less than 2 years. And then I had the opportunity to take a job at a company, a bigger company out here in California, where I am to this day in the San Diego area. And I was joining this group called Orthobiologics. It was a newly formed group by the company, and I was one of 3 engineers that they brought in, and we were headed up by our manager, the manager of Orthobiologics. And when I took the job as a product development engineer, I thought that that's what my job would be. I'd be doing work in the lab. I'd be developing implants and designing them on my laptop. And essentially, either I was in the lab or in front of my computer. And for the first couple of months, that's exactly what the job was, and I was quite happy with that. It wasn't until my boss brought me into his office one day and told me I was going to be a project lead. For those of you all that don't know what that means, essentially it means you're going to have the job of 2 people, your product development engineer and a project manager. The company that I worked at didn't have project managers, and so they basically pawned that responsibility off on the product development engineers. So in addition to my product development activities, I also had to manage the timeline, manage the resources and the group that I was working with. So marketing, regulatory affairs, quality, operations, legal even. But the biggest part of being this project lead was every month I had to get up in front of senior management and give a presentation on project progress. It was a meeting that happened every month. The people in the audience, we're talking the CEO, VP of R&D, VP of marketing, basically anyone with a corner office and their own admin was in the audience when I was giving this presentation. And let me tell you, those first few presentations were absolutely horrendous. I didn't know it was possible to sweat as profusely as I did during those initial presentations. I mean, there was sweat coming out of places I didn't know sweat came out of. And you would have thought that after that first presentation of me just completely wetting the bed, I would have placed more emphasis on being more prepared. But I really didn't. I essentially would get up, I would slap a bunch of slides together and put a bunch of data on them and just get up in front of these people and read the slides and get out of there as quickly as I possibly could. But I realized I couldn't keep doing this because, especially during the Q&A session afterwards, I was getting the same type of questions that I thought I had answered during the presentation. But because I didn't present the information in a way that the audience could actually take in and understand, they weren't getting it. And a lot of times they would just tune out. And basically I was wasting my time and I was wasting their time as well. Things eventually came to a head when the project that I was brought out to the company to do was canceled. And I remember when that happened, I firmly still to this day believe that if I had been a little bit better and a little more effective in public speaking, perhaps I could have saved that project. Now I'm thinking, oh, am I out of a job now? Because that was the project I was there to work on. Luckily, that wasn't the case, but that it definitely was the wake-up call that I needed to become better at public speaking. So I basically threw myself into doing just that. I joined Toastmasters. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's an international organization whose main goal is to help people improve their public speaking. So I was a member for a number of years doing that. I volunteered at work and outside of work for any type of public speaking opportunity that I could have. I would lead meetings at, the project lead. So that was definitely helpful in getting better. And obviously I always, as a project lead, I had to give these presentations still. So I got better that way too. So eventually public speaking became a pretty big part of my life as a project lead or a product development engineer. And it's something I definitely didn't see coming. And now I have a bunch of scenarios. Some of them were mentioned already in the intro, but I'll go into more detail on some tips that I have in improving in the certain types of scenarios that I'm sure you all will be facing as time goes on, and definitely in your careers. So the first one I think is the most obvious one. I mean, Jason said that he'll be giving a talk not too long in Glasgow, and this has to do with the conference talk. I've attended numerous conferences and given conference talks as well. And I'm sure you all can appreciate this scenario. At least I know I can. Especially a lot of the more academic focused conferences, if you're sleepy, that's probably not the place to be as a member or being in the audience of one of these talks. Because oftentimes what happens is someone will get up on the stage in front of the lectern and they'll have their slides and they'll read them verbatim. And by reading them verbatim, they won't have any kind of engagement with the audience. You probably won't even know what they look like after the fact because they didn't look out at the audience at all. They were either looking at their computer screen or they were looking at their slides on the projection. And so there was never any opportunity to get any kind of engagement with the audience. So people would tune out, people would fall asleep, people would be on their phones. But essentially, it was a waste of time for everybody. And I always got the sense at these conferences that people were more interested in just giving the presentation as opposed to the presentation having some sort of impact on the audience. And I just think that we could do a lot better in terms of just being more mindful about giving better presentations, or at least more effective presentations. And one tip that I have on that, especially in a conference talk where you have a lot of back-to-back type of talks, is saying something in your presentation that would be unexpected for the presentation that you're giving. An example that I have just from my own days working in orthobiologics, you know what? I just realized I never explained what orthobiologics is. So I worked in spinal implants specifically, and spinal implants can be made out of a lot of things. So if you have some sort of bulging disc or a herniated disc, you'll get, typically an orthopedic surgeon would remove that disc and replace it with some sort of implant. And that implant can be made out of metal or ceramic, but it could also be made out of human bone. I worked in the group that made implants out of human bone. And those implants typically are made at tissue banks. And that's where you'll get a lot of donor bone being donated to the tissue bank. And if you've never been to a tissue bank, you will never forget the smell of human bone being cut. It's a smell that's just, it's unforgettable. And when I worked as an engineer and we would have booths at conferences, we had a lot of dummy product. And obviously we're not going to use human bone for the dummy product just for marketing purposes. We would actually make dummy product out of cow bone. I don't know. I mean, cows eat only grass from what I understand. They're herbivores. I don't understand how their bones stink so badly. I mean, if you cut cow bone, it's even worse than the human bone, and it's fatty too. So you got to get rid of all that fat. It's all yellow and gelatinous. It's really gross. So essentially, I would talk about this just briefly during the presentation, and it definitely perked people's ears up, because oftentimes you're not expecting to hear about the smelly cow bone and human bone during a presentation. So that's one tip that I have. Another one that's really big, especially for conference talks where there's an agenda, you really want to try to stick to the agenda. In fact, I'm really happy that Dan started this presentation at 9 o'clock, so he was really mindful of the timing. And that's what I want to talk about now is making sure that your talk is within the allotted time. I don't know how many conferences I've been to where you know what the agenda is. The talks are supposed to start at 9 and end at 9:15, but inevitably it never ends at 9:15. It always goes over, and that just throws the whole schedule off on the conference because the next presentation can't start on time, and it's just something that just continues on. So when it comes to preparing for conference talks, I'm a big fan of practicing your speech under timed conditions to make sure that you're within time. So if you're given 15 minutes, don't talk for 15 minutes, because ultimately there might be a bit of ad-libbing that you do during the presentation. Always try to end a couple of minutes late, a couple of minutes earlier. So if it's 15 minutes, and 13 minutes earlier. So no one's ever complained about a presentation going too short. They certainly complain about them going too long. So if you have that extra 2-minute buffer, if you're given a 15-minute presentation, you know you're not going to go over time. And the audience definitely is happy and appreciates that, at least from my experience. The next tip that I have about conference talks is something that I actually took away from a stand-up comedy course that I did out here in California a couple of years ago. And it has to do with using a callback during your presentation. They're very popular in stand-up comedy. A lot of comics use them. And essentially what a callback is saying something during your presentation near the end of it that you that you had mentioned earlier in the presentation. It ties a nice bow around the presentation, and it's quite clever, and it kind of rounds things out. So for instance, if I was talking about at one of the project status meetings about a marketing assessment, say at the beginning of the presentation, I said, last time I spoke in front of you all, I wasn't able to get the marketing assessment done. And near the end of the presentation, I might say something like, well, isn't it great that the marketing assessment got done? On to the operations assessment. That's kind of a crude example, but basically what I was doing is referring to something that I referred to back earlier in the presentation, near the end of the presentation. And it's been really helpful to me in just keeping people's attention and just, as I mentioned, tying a nice bow around the whole presentation. Now I'm going to move on to
Neil. Before you move on, can I interject?
Yeah, of course.
A question from one of our participants. When you first started focusing on improving your public speaking, what was the first skill that you focused on that was most important to improve?
For me, it was dealing with my nerves. Obviously, oftentimes when you get up in front of people, you're nervous. I mean, I mentioned all the sweating I was doing during those initial presentations in front of management, and I didn't want to look like a sweaty mess every time I got in front of these people. And so I did a lot of work in just trying to figure out how to best deal with my nerves. And one thing that I like to do, actually, to try to kind of get rid of all that nervous energy, is before I get up in front of people to do some sort of physical activity. whether that's just, a light jog or walking or knee bends. It really helps to, as I mentioned, get rid of that nervous energy. And then another thing is deep breathing before you get up there too, to try to level your breathing so that when you get up there, you're not doing a whole bunch of shallow breathing, feeling like you're going to pass out during the presentation. So those are some tips that I have on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. And Neil, I had another question as well. So you spoke of how, in terms of content, having something unexpected can help your presentation stand out and really grab the audience's attention. I was wondering as well if you had any tips on the delivery. So is there a certain style of, delivering and speaking your presentation that can also, similarly pull in the audience's attention?
Yeah, look, humor definitely helps, but obviously humor can be subjective. When it comes to public speaking, I'm also a big fan of practicing beforehand. If you can practice in front of some people, that's even better. So you can try out your delivery in front of others and get their take on it. And if it works in front of those people, it may very well work in front of the audience that you're going to be speaking in front of too.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So now I'll talk a little bit more about thesis defense. I didn't go on to get a PhD, but I did do a master's, and so I had a thesis defense, just not a dissertation. So I think I can speak on thesis defenses. What's really big on when it comes to theses is the people in the audience obviously are going to be your committee, but then there's going to be other grad students and faculty that may not be as knowledgeable on your thesis, on your dissertation. So it's really important to try to grab people's attention near the beginning by not being being more broad when it comes to your intro and not getting too focused on the details, because the people in the audience that don't know much about what you're talking about, they may not very well tune in because you're being way too technically detailed in the presentation. So when it comes to thesis defenses, I'm really big on talking about the research in terms of why it's important. A lot of times, especially when we've been working on dissertation for 3, 4, 5 years, however many years, we get really much into the weeds of it. But the people in the actually listening to the defense, especially the people that aren't as knowledgeable on the research, really want to know, why is it even important for you to be talking about it in the first place? And kind of presenting the research in terms of a chronology, I think is really helpful too. So talking about the things that came before it and why what you're working on is a natural progression as to what has come before it, I think is really helpful too. And it just shows that you know about the history of the work that you're working on, and you know where it falls in that history. That's really helpful too. And I think a lot of times, I know this was the case when I was working on my thesis defense, when I was doing my master's. We placed a lot of emphasis in the written part, so writing the thesis, writing the dissertation. But we don't place as much emphasis on the actual oral presentation. I think that's a big mistake. And when it comes to actually organizing the actual oral presentation, using the written dissertation or the written defense or the written thesis as a guide to putting your slides together for the thesis defense, I think makes perfect sense too. So obviously you're not going to talk about the results before you talk about the observations or the hypothesis. You're going to present things in a way that's logical, and I think that's really helpful too when it comes to the thesis defenses. And a lot of the things that I talked about even during the conference talk would be really helpful too. Obviously, you definitely want to be within time. If you're giving a time, a callback could very well be helpful too, and tie a nice bow around the entire presentation. And even talking about something unexpected. I mean, these things can be really dry and technical and frankly boring in the thesis defenses. If you really want to try to keep people's attention, talking about something, just bringing up something that's unexpected could definitely be a way to do that.
Neil, I had another question related to the audience for a thesis defense or for a conference talk. So you spoke about essentially tailoring, especially the intro of your presentations to the audience and giving that context. Do you have any advice for the World Biomaterials Congress in particular, given that it's an international conference and one of a fairly broad scope? Do you have any advice for tailoring your presentation differently for something that's more global versus something that's more of a national or a local conference?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so let me think about that. Yeah, well, I guess when it comes to a global as opposed to national, I mean, a lot of the things are going to apply to both, but when it comes to global, there might be some, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? There's some, I guess, potentially cultural differences. That's something I've definitely noticed. Some cultures are way more formal when it comes to their presentations than others. So learning that culture, trying to learn as much as you can about that culture when delivering a presentation to that culture, I think can be really helpful. Let's see, what else do I want to add to that? Might be helpful. I'll continue to think about that, and if I have any more thoughts about it, I'll definitely say something.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. The next point I want to talk about is, if you're going in for job interviews. So obviously, all of you all, if you're in school, you're eventually going to enter the job market, whether it be in academia or in industry. I'm assuming a lot of you all will go into industry because, frankly, there are more industry jobs than academic jobs. And so a lot of the suggestions I have here will definitely apply to most, if not all of you. But when it comes to job interviews, I find that the biggest issue that a lot of students will have is, especially if they didn't do any type of internship, is having the experience to then actually get the job. But it's kind of a chicken and egg argument. It's like you can't get the job unless you have the experience, but you got to get the experience to get the job. It's really difficult to navigate that. So when it comes to that type of situation, I'm a big fan in getting mentors, but the way you get those mentors is joining organizations and especially when you join these type of these organizations as a student member, it can be very helpful in getting those mentors. So I actually, in this instance, there was a alumnus from one of my former schools that contacted me, and he said he wanted to get into medical devices, specifically regulatory affairs. And he wanted to hear my advice on how he can do that. I mean, he was a PhD student. He didn't have any regulatory affairs experience. So I told him to join the local chapter of RAPS, Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. And you can join as a student member. And by doing that, you get instant access to a bunch of people that are working actively in regulatory affairs. And more than enough of them would be more than willing to be mentors to students, because I'm sure they remember what it was like when they're trying to get their first job. But when it comes to that, when it really comes to even reaching out to these people, and once you join these organizations, it's really important to give and get. So you don't want to just be a taker, because oftentimes, especially when people contact you, they're only focused on themselves. You definitely want to be focused on what the needs and the wants of the other person too. And you might think, I'm just a student. What do I have to offer this person? They are the ones that have what I really want. But you'd be surprised. So when it comes to talking to these people that you want to mentor you, something that you could possibly give is a white paper or an article that you found that might be of interest. So do some research on them, find out what their interests are. And then tailor your response or your messages to them to basically talk about those interests. So a great example is, I looked at your profile. I'm really interested in breaking into this field, and I saw that you're interested in X. So I saw this article on X, and I thought you might be interested in. It shows that you're actually putting forth some effort, as opposed to just coming up to them and saying, "Give me something. Help me get a job. Help me get an interview." Another point that I really want to make when it comes to job interviews is, before you go into them, you really want to have some background on the people that you're going to be interviewing with. It shows that you actually care about getting that particular job as opposed to a job in general, and it will definitely set you apart from the other applicants. So a great way to do that is firstly, once you get the interview, you want to reach out to the companies, typically the HR person, and you want to ask them for a list of the people that you're going to be interviewing with. And once you get that list of names, you want to go on LinkedIn and look them up. Find out, again, what their interests are, where they worked at before. Find out if you have any interests or some connections in common. So these are things that you could bring up during the interview, because ultimately, a lot of times people want to help people that at least are tangentially related to them. So you might not know them personally, the interviewer personally, but you have somebody in common. So if you name that, they'll be way more likely to help you out. And then another thing that I really want to talk about is, especially when it comes to job interviews, we typically will go on LinkedIn, we'll go on Indeed, all those various job boards, we'll see job being posted, and we'll apply. Well, you're not the only person that's seen that job posting. Several hundreds, maybe even thousands of people have applied for that job too. So how do you stand out? It's really difficult. Well, one way that I think is really helpful is targeting companies that you want to work for, even if they don't have jobs available, and reaching out to their hiring manager, reaching out to the person who you think will be your hiring manager directly. Because you might be surprised to know this, but 70% of jobs are not advertised. And so if you reach out to a company and you get in touch, you build a relationship with them and have them know your background, they might put something in their mind thinking, this person has a perfect background for something we've been looking for. We don't have a job opening right now, but we might even create something for this person, or in the time when we do have something, this person is at least top of mind. And I can say, even from personal experience, this has definitely worked. I reached out to a small startup company a few years ago, and I got in touch with their chief technological officer, and we stayed in touch for months. And then just out of the blue one day, he contacted me, asking me if they had a consultant role and they wanted to know if I was interested. And I ended up doing that for a year. And that wouldn't have happened if I was just, combing LinkedIn or Indeed looking for a job application or a job being advertised, because there was no job being advertised. This is a job they never advertised. They reached out to me directly for this job. So definitely keep that in mind too. Don't just focus on applying for jobs. Also focus on reaching out to companies you want to work for and getting in touch with hiring managers and being top of mind by being helpful.
Neil, I had a question about job interviews that maybe pertains to conference presentations as well. So I was wondering if you could share any tips on responding to questions during a job interview or questions after a conference presentation, both neutral questions as well as perhaps more negative questions, how to appropriately address those types of questions.
Okay. Well, when it comes to questions, I'm a big fan of thinking about them first. Don't just jump into answering them. So it's more than appropriate to take a few seconds to actually digest the question so you can give a more informed answer. And then when it comes to either neutral or I think even negative type of questions, just attack them head on. I mean, there's no real reason to avoid them just because they're negative. I mean, the negative could very well turn into a positive at some point. I mean, ultimately, it's a learning experience. And a big thing when it comes, actually, I got this question not too long ago. I was doing a podcast interview, and the interviewer asked me about answering questions that you don't know the answer to. Don't pretend you know the answer to them. that's my big takeaway on that, because you can get found out, and then you're embarrassed because you tried to make something up on the spot in the hopes that no one would know. So I'm a big fan of, if you don't know, saying you don't know, but it's an interesting question that you'll find out the answer to at some point.
That's great advice in any situation, Neil.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd rather not know the answer and say I don't know the answer than make up an answer and then somebody, contradict me, and now I'm looking like a fool in front of everybody. And so the next scenario I would like to address is the elevator pitch. So as it was said during the intro, I'm an entrepreneur, so I work for myself. So oftentimes I go to a lot of networking events, and these things can be absolutely dreadful. And the reason for that is a lot of people are just not schooled in the way to engage people in these type of events. What often happens is someone will come up to you and they'll just throw their business card in your face and introduce themselves. They have no idea what you do. They have no idea if you're interested in what they do, but yet they're putting their business card in your face, and it's kind of like, I guess they call this the spray and pray method. Just throw out as many business cards as you can and hope that, hope for the best. But I'm a big believer when it comes to elevator pitches, in navigating these networking events in general, to be a bit more strategic when it comes to them. And so when it comes to elevator pitches specifically, I'm a big fan of having them be short and to the point. So I'm talking 30 seconds or less. And you definitely won't want to go longer than that, because you want to keep people's attention. And going longer than that, they might start to fade away. And so 30 seconds or less, you can definitely get enough information in that 30 seconds if you practice beforehand. So I'm a big fan of practicing my elevator pitches before. So you want to time them too. So to make sure that you're within those 30 seconds. I remember once I was at this networking event. Well, actually, it wasn't a networking event. It was a business affiliate group. I was a member of the San Diego Chamber of Commerce, and it was the first meeting of this group. And the person that put the group together asked everybody to go, went around the circle or the table and asked everybody to talk about themselves. And they said 30 seconds or less. They actually said 30 seconds. So I took out my phone, took it out to the timer part, and I timed myself. And I think I got to 29 seconds. I was the only person that did that. Everybody else went over time. And I just remember being so annoyed by it. And other people might get annoyed by it too. I'm not a unicorn in that sense. So what you actually want, the content you want to have in that pitch, is what you do and what people could gain about what you do. Why people should care about what you do. So just for an example purpose, I will actually do my elevator pitch that I do a lot when I go to these networking events. First question you often get from people: what do you do? Don't just say I'm an engineer, because that's not specific enough. What type of engineering do you do? What industry do you work in? You know nothing about that person. You just know they're an engineer. So here's my example. I started a business called Teach the Geek to help engineers and scientists with their public speaking. And the motivation for it came from my own struggles in public speaking in front of management, specifically decision makers who didn't have the same technical background that I did. I got a lot better at communicating with these people, and I built a course around it called Teach the Geek to Speak. 22 seconds. He basically found out what I do and why people should care about it. People should care because engineers and scientists oftentimes struggle with talking to people who are decision makers, who don't have the same technical background as them, and just engaging them in these communication, in communication in general. And I got all that out in 22 seconds. And so any other question that comes after that could be a lot more informed than, if I just said I'm an engineer, right, that does public speaking. Okay, what engineering did you come from, or what kind of things do you talk about in your course? Like it's the questions that you're getting are going to be better questions, more higher quality questions when you put a lot more thought into what you're going to be saying, especially if you need to fit in as much information as possible into 30 seconds. I'm going to go, unless there's any questions, I'll go on to the next scenario.
Thank you.
Okay. So now I want to talk a bit more about investor pitches. Now, so even though I have my own business, I don't have a business that requires investor funding, but I was a member of the San Diego Entrepreneurs Exchange, and a lot of the companies that are members of that group are companies that are looking for investor funding, whether it's from angel investors or venture capital firms. And they do a lot of workshops and seminars on various topics that be of interest to these people. One of which is how to pitch investors, the most effective way to do so. So I can talk some in some length about that, even though I'm not a person who needs investor funding myself. So one of the things that's really important when it comes to pitching investors is the audience that's going to be in the people that are going to be in the audience. Some of them are going to be technically minded, and some of them won't be. So the slides that you have during your presentation, you don't want them to be too technical in fashion, because it's going to turn off the people that aren't technically minded. But you want to have technical slides available in the event that those technical people ask questions. You have them to bring up, if needed. That's really important, actually. Another thing that's really important when it comes to talking to these investor pitches is being able to tell a story. Now that might not be all that obvious to people, and certainly wasn't obvious to me. But the more I thought about it, when you were a child, perhaps your parents read you a bedtime story, before you went to sleep. And it's not as if as we got older, we didn't like stories anymore. It's just for some reason we moved away from it. Especially, I think those of us that are in the technical fields, perhaps we think it's inappropriate to tell stories when it comes to giving presentations. But it really is a great way to keep people's attention, especially when it comes to if you're pitching a product or service. So typically, it's almost like this kind of hero-like story. Like you have this problem, and then your product or service was able to overcome the problem. And if you're able to talk about that in the form of a story of somebody who had a problem, overcame the problem with the product, and now is so much better for it, it really helps to keep people's attention. And they kind of like seeing the person overcome the issue that they had. So that's really important when it comes to pitching, when it comes to investors. Another thing that's really important that I found out from just sitting in on these type of presentations is the people that are actually the investors, they want you to be honest about the challenges that you've faced up to that point. If you say that you haven't faced any challenges, that everything has been a smooth road, they won't believe you. And if they don't believe you when you say that, they likely won't believe the rest of your presentation either. There have been challenges that you faced. And oftentimes, especially if you're pitching to VC firms, they have resources within their firms that can help you with those challenges. But if you don't tell them that you have those challenges, obviously they can't help you with them. So that's a big point I wanted to make. And then another thing I really wanted to harp on is don't say that you have no competitors. You have competitors. And if you tell investors you have no competitors, they'll think that you don't know the market very well, or you're sure that's a liar, neither of which is good. So acknowledge the fact that you have competitors. Just say that your product is addressing a need, or that the competitors aren't. That's perfectly fine to say, and it's appropriate to say. So definitely do that. And then the last point I want to make about investor pitches is you definitely want to focus on your strengths as opposed to the competitor's weaknesses. So I know I said earlier that you want to acknowledge the competitors, but you definitely want to focus more on the strengths of your product, and you do that through the story that you told about the problem that you were solving and having somebody use your product or service and was able to overcome that problem.
Neil, do you have any advice on tailoring your investor pitches to the room? For instance, on making your story or your pitch more appealing to specific people that you might be, pitching to?
Yeah, so typically the people that are going to be in those type of meetings are going to be the head people. They're going to be people who are more interested in finance. They're going to be people more interested in the technology. There's certain slides you definitely need to have for pitch decks in general. So obviously the one I spoke about is addressing the problem and then the solution to the problem. They're going to likely want to see some sort of financial projections, how much money you're asking for. Another slide is in the event that there's actually some intellectual property that you have on the idea. A lot of these firms want to know if you have patent or provisional patents or even issued patents on your technology. So they know that if they're investing into your company, what exactly they're investing into. And so these are the type of slides that are typical in these type of also slides about the market. How many people that you think that your product or service can impact, just based on the amount of people that are in the market that you're trying to get into. What percentage of that market that you think your product can infiltrate? All of these are slides that are typical in most pitch decks when it comes to talking to investors.
Great. So it sounds like you're identifying sort of the specific stakeholders, the roles that they play, and types of information that they specifically would be interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to the more technical information, even though there are technical people in the audience, the non-technical people aren't going to be as up to date on that type of information. So you want to hold back those slides until the end. You go through your entire pitch deck, and then if in the event that you get those type of questions from those technically minded people, you have those slides ready to answer those questions. It's really important, especially when it comes to investor pitches, to try to anticipate the type of questions that they're going to ask.
Sounds great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And now those are some of the scenarios that I've come across or that I thought would be of use to this particular audience. Now I want to go into some more, I guess, tips that I've used throughout my my life, or just as I've gotten better in public speaking, that I think can apply to any of these scenarios that I think can apply to you all as well. Well, I know that can apply to you as well. Things that I didn't do initially, but since I've started doing them, have made me way more effective in public speaking. And that goes to any type of presentation that I'm giving. The first tip is this, and it's so important to do, and it's definitely not something that I initially did. It's knowing your audience, and it just, as I said, no matter what type of presentation you're giving, if you're giving a presentation and you put the presentation together, not taking your audience's needs and wants into account, they're not going to listen, and it's just going to be a waste of your time and theirs as well. So I can think of so many instances where I was giving a presentation or even listening to a presentation where it was rather obvious that the person didn't do this, and it makes all the difference when it comes to just improving in public speaking. So, for instance, that even the example that I gave about investor pitches, the people so the people that are there are going to be technically minded people. They're going to be more finance people. There's going to be obviously the heads of the VC firms. All of them are going to have different needs. I can remember when I used to have to give presentations in front of senior management, as I mentioned, the CEO's there, the VP of R&D, the VP of marketing, and all of them have different interests. And a great way to get what those interests are is going to their administrative assistants, especially if the company is a large one. You typically aren't going to be, you're typically not going to have access to the CEO, the VP of R&D, but their admins deal with them every day. They know them the best of all the people at the company. So you can go to them before you have to give your presentation or while you're putting your presentation together and ask them, I'm doing this project progress presentation. What type of information do I need to hit to make sure that I keep this person's attention? And they'll be able to tell you. Although, I would say that if the company is small enough, you may actually be able to go to that person directly. And if you're able to put in what they want to hear into your presentation, they're going to be way more likely to actually listen to what you have to say. So this is a big tip that I have, and it's where it made all the difference to me. And it focuses your preparation, so you know exactly what needs to go in there to make sure that you keep these people's attention, and it doesn't waste your time in putting in extraneous things that they don't care about. The next tip I have. Oh, were you gonna say something, Jason?
Neil, I actually have a question from a participant.
Okay.
I think to some degree you've already kind of answered this, but maybe expand on it a little bit. What would you say is more favorable for investor pitches? To be cut and dry and to the point, or to actually kind of expand on your personal journey and why investors should invest in your product?
Before I joined that San Diego Entrepreneurs Exchange group, I would have said it was choice number one. But after being a member of that group for a number of years, I realized it's number two, because ultimately these companies or these venture capital firms, these angel investors, they're investing in people. They're not necessarily. It may sound kind of counterintuitive, but they invest in the people that are actually doing the work. They need to believe that the people that are doing the work can actually do it so they can get their investment back. So it's really important to try to build that sort of relationship even with the audience, so that they're comfortable with you, you as the person that they're investing into. So yeah, I know as a technical person that might not make a whole bunch of sense. It's like, no, I just want to get to the point, straight and cut and dry. This is what it is. But it's really important, especially when you're dealing with non-technical people. There's a bigger emotional aspect that I think a lot of us give credit for.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then this
Right.
next.
And I had a question.
Yeah, sure, Jason.
Oh, sorry, Neil. Yeah, I had a question as well. So, in terms of knowing your audience, I'm wondering too if you could share any tips, or if you think it's valuable to look at the sort of the context in which your presentation, whether that's for a conference or elsewhere, would take place in. Like, do you want to consider maybe preceding, talks, or just kind of what the audience would be primed to care about or to be familiar with concept-wise?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be giving a presentation in a mixed audience where you got different technical, knowledge of what you're talking about, you definitely don't want to be as technical as you possibly be, because you're going to lose the people that aren't as technically minded. Now, if you're giving a talk in front of people that are are knowledgeable of what you're talking about, well, you can actually get into the nitty-gritty of the technical details. And I gave the example when I was talking about the investor pitches of having slides ready for those technically minded people that want to get into the weeds on your technology. So when it comes to knowing your audience, it's definitely giving some sort of thought as to the people that are going to be in the audience and tailoring your presentation to what they actually want to hear. It makes all the difference. And that's about all I really can say about it. It's just it's way more important than I think a lot of us give credit for. You just can't just get up in front of people with a bunch of slides that you think are important and talk about them. It won't go over well if you didn't take into account the needs of the audience.
Great. So it sounds like the level of technical detail that you should incorporate depends also on the expertises and kind of specialties of your audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the number one tip. That's why I listed it as number one.
Great. Thank you.
This is the next tip, and it's definitely a pet peeve of mine. And I say that even though I used to do this very, very frequently, especially when I started giving presentations. That paragraph on the right, I mean, if you're willing to read all that, all power to you. But the majority of the people that you'll be talking to, they won't. And even if they do, that means that they're reading as opposed to listening to what you're talking about. And ultimately, we're talking about public speaking, not public reading. I don't know if you've noticed this, but all the slides that I've presented up to this point, there hasn't been a whole lot of text on them. It's mostly been pictures. And I did that on purpose because if you have pictures, you eliminate an option for people when it comes to your presentation. They can't read the slide. They can either listen to what you have to say or tune you out. You've eliminated that option of reading the slide. And I firmly believe in minimizing those type of options, and because ultimately you want people to listen. So if you give them less options, then they have less options to not listen. So when it comes to the keeping to the slides in general, I'm a big fan of using pictures. But then if you do have to have any kind of text, I am a big fan of minimizing them to 5 points at most, because there's only so much information that we can take in at a time. So you have a whole bunch of text on a slide. I just don't think it's as helpful. And not only that, but by not having all this text on the slide, it forces you to know your material very well, because you can't just use reading the slides as a crutch when you're actually giving the presentation. So I'm a big fan of minimizing text to try to keep people's attention. So now I have one other tip, and it's a big one in the sense that it's something that a lot of people don't want to do. It's certainly something that I didn't want to do when I wanted to get better at public speaking. But perhaps of all the tips that I've given, maybe it's been the best one in terms of me getting better in public speaking, and that is videoing yourself. I'm a big fan of actually taking video of yourself giving presentations. And this could be for your thesis defense. This could even be your conference talk. You could actually video yourself giving your conference talk and being able to go back and look at the video afterwards. You might cringe a little because of all the things that you think you can improve on, but how else are you going to improve on them if you don't see them? You could give your presentation without the video, but then it's really difficult to then think of. You basically have to memorize all the things that you wanted to improve on, but being able to see it in real time, that's really helpful in getting better. It also helps in even seeing the things you like about what you presented. And ultimately, when it comes to public speaking, it's practice makes progress. Not perfect, because there's no such thing, but every time you do it, you get a lot better at it. And being able to see yourself on camera, doing the things that you like and doing the things that you want to improve on, is really helpful, and it's definitely been the biggest thing in my improvement in public speaking. And these are some of the things that I actually use when it comes to videoing myself. So you see, for less than $50, I know some of you might be students, so $50 might not be a trivial amount of money, but it's money well spent. So just with your smartphone and some of these other equipment, you can video yourself giving speeches, and then going back to the tape and watching them afterwards. It's made all the difference for me. So now I want to talk a little bit more about Teach the Geek to Speak and the whole motivation for it and just what exactly it is. So I started the platform Teach the Geek with the intention of developing a suite of courses that would be of interest to people like us, people that work in the STEM fields, be engineers and scientists who want to improve on things that a lot of times we don't focus on as technical people. So things like public speaking was obviously the first one. The other ones I want to develop are, proper networking, proper interviewing, just things that we don't learn really in school. And so that's the motivation of the whole platform. And I started just with public speaking because it just seemed like the most immediate need, especially to me and people like me. I mentioned that during those presentations in front of management, I wasn't very good at it, but trust me, I wasn't even the worst. I sat in on some of those other presentations by other engineers, and yeah, they made me look like a Tony Robbins. So, Teach the Geek to Speak essentially is a course that is meant to help us. It's a 6-step process essentially to practice and deliver any speech you have to give. When I first put the course together, it was just me sitting at my dinner table, just talking about things that I think were of interest, would be of interest in getting better in public speaking. And luckily, I never put it out because a friend of mine looked at it and said, "You can't put this out. You can't release this. This is terrible. There's no flow to this. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just you just going off the cuff." So she was actually the one that suggested putting it in terms of a process. And looking back on it, I feel a little stupid not knowing that myself because I worked in medical devices. And in medical devices, you have to follow a process to develop medical devices. It's FDA mandated. It's an FDA regulated field. It's mandatory. Products get recalled if you don't follow proper design control process. And so that's what I did. I went back to the drawing board and I made this course into a process that anyone could follow. And I made it online because as I mentioned, I was a member of Toastmasters for a number of years, and I actually visited a Toastmasters group at a company. And including myself, only 4 people were there. And this was a company of hundreds of people. The person that ran the group said that was actually rather typical because people oftentimes can't make the time to go to the meetings. So I figured if people have an online resource that they can access whenever they want, that might be a bit more useful than having to actually go to a physical location. At the end of the course, I suggest a bunch of exercises that people can do to actually to use what I talk about in the course, to actually use the process that I talk about in the course in their presentations. And it's worked out really well. I mean, I reached out, or I focused on people like us because I see us as needing the help, and frankly, I didn't feel comfortable speaking to other people outside of science and engineering because I don't know their struggles. I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like giving a conference talk as a salesperson. I never worked in sales. So I work in product development. So that's why I focused on engineers and scientists specifically.
So Neil, I do have another question from a participant.
Okay.
Wanted to know if you had any tips on posture, movement, use of the lectern as a sturdy foundation. Any tips on that kind of thing?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was a member of Toastmasters for a number of years, and Toastmasters is big on a lot of the nonverbal part of public speaking. So using the space, hand gestures, eye contact, that type of thing. And all of that's really important. But when it comes to, at least for public speaking for me, I'm way more interested in the actual message. It's actually a funny story about that now I think about it. So when I was a member of Toastmasters, I was a judge for a speech contest. So someone actually gives a speech, and then there are 2 evaluators that then evaluate the speech. And when I gave my evaluation, I was way more interested in the actual message of the presentation. Was there a story that was easily followable? Was there a clear beginning, middle, and end? What did I actually take away from the presentation? The other evaluator, all he mentioned was all the nonverbal stuff. The person didn't use the space adequately. Their eye contact could have improved. They patted their leg with their hand incessantly, and they noticed that. A lot of things I didn't even notice, to be very honest. I was way more interested in the message. And so when it comes, especially when it comes to getting better at something, you don't want to try to get better at everything at once. I'd say the first thing to get better at when it comes to public speaking is making sure that your message is easily followable and just at the level of the audience you're talking to. All the nonverbal stuff can come later.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that essentially marks the end of what I wanted to say. And so for anybody who wants to get more information on the course or just get in touch, you can go to teachthegeek.com. I want to let you all know that I also have a YouTube channel where I actually interview people that are in science and engineering that do public speaking. I actually released a video today. And to learn more about or to actually watch the videos, you can go to youtube.teachthegeek.com. But if you're a person that more prefers a podcast form, I take the audio of those interviews and I turn them into podcast episodes. So you can go to anchor.fm/teachthegeek for the podcast. And then just if you want to email me, you can reach me at hello@teachthegeek.com. And I'm Teach the Geek basically on all the social media platforms.
Neil, thank you so much for your time today and for your insight and your guidance. I think this will be really helpful. I did have one kind of observation or thought as that one question came up about tailoring to the global audience at a World Congress. One thing that I try to do in preparing any kind of communication to a more global audience is just to trim down on the use of colloquialisms, things that don't translate well. Just one of my rules of thumb. I've just thrown it out there for the good of the call.
It's funny you mentioned that, Dan, because as I mentioned, I'm also as Jason mentioned in the intro, I also work as a patent agent, and working as a patent agent, it's actually that's actually important as well when we're having, especially if you're applying for patents in different countries. And you have to have the application translated into a different language. It's very important to avoid terms that don't translate into other languages. So, for instance, the word flywheel. Well, in English, the definition of that is pretty clear. But try translating that into Chinese or Japanese. There is no equivalent. So it's really important, to your point, to make sure that you avoid these colloquialisms, especially when you're talking to people globally.
Thank you. And then just a few quick announcements or reminders, if I may. As we're approaching the World Congress in Glasgow, wanted to let you all know that we'll be having a Young Scientist Mixer on Thursday the 21st, a SIG Mixer on Saturday the 23rd, and the SFP Business Meeting will be on Friday the 22nd at lunch, and we'll have lunch provided for you there. So we do hope to see you in Glasgow. And again, Neil, thank you very much for your time today. Jason, thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to say in parting?
Nope, I think you encapsulated that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again. Have a great day, everybody.
You too. Thanks again.